Hey folks. First off, I am feeling way better than last week. You can probably hear it in my voice, because I am not riddled with the cold anymore. So thanks for everybody for their well wishes and for their advice on how to get myself mended. I am feeling all sorts of healthy. Also, apologies, because I'm pretty sure this is going to be a little bit late coming out, because I have a very crazy weekend, and it is going to keep me from editing. Although I have watched the episode, obviously, but the likelihood of me getting this edited up in the sort of time it has been usually is unlikely. One day I might actually do a little bit in one of the videos about how my process works, but not today. But it's kind of interesting if you're into that kind of thing. But for now, we're up to the 4th episode of the final season of Outlander. So we may as well jump right in and find out what happened this week. Episode 804, Muskets, Liberty and Sauerkraut, starts off with Roger and Bree heading to Savannah, with Jamie and Claire giving them some gold and a letter if they head off, and yeah, we'll get back to them later on. In the meantime, Jamie's decided that he can't just kill or evict Cunningham because that would be a bad look and also would be very inconvenient for the plot. So he's just off to round up his own potential militia and see who's available. And he's like, hey look, hey, it's one of the twins, remember them? Anyway, Ian tells him that he's just met a Scotsman who knows Bree and Roger from Scotland, and oh shit, that can only be Rob Cameron, because you know, time travel and stuff. Only it's not, it's Buck. And Buck says, don't worry about Rob, here's the book that he stole. So, okay, apparently we've just tied up about 3 plots in one sentence. And back at the ridge, you know, Claire's battling the hatches because there's a big storm on, and her wee Fanny starts talking about ghosts and hauntings and Jane and living at a brothel. And Claire starts telling her about ghosts and haunting of places, which sounds like it could be set up for something later. And also sounds weirdly like the stone tape theory, which you should look up because it's kind of interesting. But then they hear another noise, and it turns out it's the old witch of the Cunninghams, who, you know, she's appeared, and it turns out she's put her shoulder out. And, yeah, remember this. This is, like, exactly the same injury that Jamie had in episode 1. Okay, same injury, same fix. And a couple of swigs of the good stuff, and old lady Cunningham's swearing, and totally not the same character who slapped Mandy in the face the other week. And Claire inexplicably also decides she likes her, so she starts talking about having to hide people in the attic if something happens. It suddenly seems like they're best pals, and Claire's totally just telling her stuff that she probably shouldn't. And the next morning, Captain Cunningham comes up to collect his sick mum, and Claire gives him like a totally cold shoulder, but he just barges inside anyway and acts all sorts of sinister right up until the point his mum tells him off. Honestly, you know, it's crazy, there's like sinister music and everything, like he's Norman Bates or something. And the next day, Jamie comes home and it's all like, hello for Buck. And Rachel seems a bit distracted and sad because it turns out she saw in the paper that there's been a massacre at the Indian village where Ian's ex-wife and kid live. So they decide they have to ride off and take a wee look. And obviously that bothers Rachel a wee bit because, you know, Ian's ex-wife and secret son will be there, which could get really awkward. Also, they might be dead, which could be even worse. And Jamie tells Ian about like the whole King's Mountain thing, and he probably should get back before that battle happens. And then Jamie says a prayer in Gaelic and sends them off. Meanwhile, the meat of the episode is actually in Savannah, where Roger and Bree have just arrived and they've given gold and whiskey to Fungus and Parsley hidden in a bunch of sauerkraut. And the convivial fun's spoilt because somebody tosses a half brick through the window, which apparently happens a lot these days because they're a partisan newsprinter and neither side actually likes that. So Bree and Roger head off to do their own things, and Fungus is off to grow on Lord John's ex, who tells him that actually Fungus is the secret, long-lost legitimate son of the Comte de Bastardy from Season 2. Remember him? He was the one who got dead of a mood necklace and a bad drink of juice. Anyway, all of his riches and land and everything belong to Fungus if he chooses to accept it and publicly admit that that's who he is. So long as, you know, he helps them get the French to set up a colony in the northwest, which sounds like that might be Canada. Is this how we end up with Quebec? I thought that was to do with Lafayette. Anyway, he's like, dunno, this is an awful lot, and, you know, he talks it over with his wife, and so it's all left up in the air. Meanwhile, Brianna goes to see the Greys, and her and William are like, hey bestie, and Pigsty is all sorts of like sour-faced bitch, which, to be honest, is fair considering that William probably is suspect in this kind of thing because he did manage to shag his own cousin last season by accident, and Lord John acting like he's trying to get the pair of them together isn't exactly helping. Anyway, they catch up and, you know, it chills William out, and when he talks to Pigsty the next day, he ends up telling her all about his bastardy to calm her down, quite unprovokedly, and she's like, oh, that's interesting, cool, maybe you should marry me and my next son can be the Earl. And he's like, I suppose, maybe, you know, it's all a bit suspect. And Brianna's chatting to Lord John that evening and is all like, you know, you didn't ask me here just to paint. And he's like, nah, I needed you to fix William's head because only you can, for some reason. And Roger, on the other hand, All this time he's been riding off to the fort, and he's like, "Hey buddy, sell us guns." And the guy's like, "Sure buddy." And then he reads a letter and is like, "Nah buddy, I hate Jamie Fraser. He quit the army last season under a mountain of bullshit writing." And Roger's like, "Oh come on buddy, I'm off." And the guy's like, "Nah buddy, we're going to attack somebody so you can't leave. But while you're here, you want to fight?" And Roger's like, "I'm not going to fight, I'm a priest." And then he's like, "Wait, I don't actually have anything to do this season." So he's like, "Okay, but only if I get to have a sword, because, you know, ninja." End of episode. So what did I think? Well, I mean, this was a week of setups, exposition, and positioning of characters for presumably what will be some kind of mid-season excitement. But also, it was an episode with a lot of character appearances. I mean, yeah, and that's kind of nice because this is the final season, so at least they seem to be making sure that most of the people who should be on the Ridge and who are still active characters in the story make an appearance, which is kind of fun. You know, we had one of the twins turning up and their half-wit wife, and they had Rachel and Ian, and we had Fanny, and we had the old and young Cunninghams, and this fucking extra who I've definitely seen on the show before, but I'm pretty sure in a different part of the timeline. It was also interesting to have people having things to do, even if it made some of the storylines feel a little bit thinner than others, like Brianna and William suddenly being soulmate sibling besties. I don't really remember them being that close, but, you know, I mean, I can barely remember them meeting, but okay, gives them something to do. And there was a theme of parentage and stuff this week, and it kind of echoes between storylines with, you know, William and Fungus. You know, you got a legitimized bastard and a bastard who has been legitimate but didn't know it, neither of whom really wants to have their super cool title. Which is interesting. It's a theme, you know, even if both of them are kind of fragments of ongoing plot lines. And that's not a problem. And you know, soap opera is obviously a thing, as I've said a lot on this show. And this week we got to know a bit more about Elspeth and a bit more about Fanny, who apparently knows
being able to satisfy a man in 2 minutes by the clock.
My cunt is worth 6 shillings. My mouth is 3.
That's a nice family. Anyway, more on that later, potentially. Similarly, it looked nice, and most of the episode fell together well. And there was some really nice shot. Kind of liked the final shot. It was pretty cool. Even if there was nothing massively outstanding this week, it's another just kind of doing its thing episode. And that is sort of an issue in and of itself. Let me explain. So, okay, as I've said many a time, I really don't mind the soap opera and stuff in the show. It's an important part of any story. But there was an awful lot of chatter and character stuff in this, which, you know, is both realistic, but it's also book-like. And I'm guessing a lot of it is straight from the books, or is tweaked from scenes in the books. And, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but too much of it gets a little boring. And it's funny, because recently I've actually been rereading the book Dune, you know, the one that the movies are based on. And I was quite surprised, because for a story that's all about a desert and people doing crazy sci-fi things, an awful lot of the book is just 2 or 3 people sat in a room talking, followed by another chapter of 2 or 3 people sat in a different room talking. And Outlander's similar in a lot of ways, and it's particularly obvious in these later seasons. Now again, it's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but a lot of this dialogue felt kind of clunky, very exposition-y, very much set up, and that's the problem. Like, the attic bit. I mean, sure, there's an attic in that. I didn't care if there was an attic in the house. Who cares? Well, we could find that out later. But also, why is Claire telling Elspeth this? Why does she suddenly decide to motivatedly tell her that, okay, there's an attic and that's where the noise comes from, but we have an attic because we might want to hide people? Okay, but wait, this is the mother of Cunningham, who we know is basically a militiaman. Why are you assuming he doesn't have the same politics as his mother? Why are you also having introduced her as like a slap-happy old hag spouting biblical stuff, only to suddenly do a complete heel turn and have her be a reasonable character last week, and this week she's swearing like a trooper and is totally just fine with Fanny being coarse and rough, which feels totally opposite to how she acted to Mandy, who, you know, she was being basically really weird to. It's a strange character turn. And similarly, Cunningham and Jamie have had a fallout. Now, sure, they are potentially on opposite sides of a thing. Well, maybe not as far as Cunningham's concerned, because he's like, well, you know, as far as he knows, Jamie's just like, I don't want you raising a militia on my land. But Claire suddenly being like, no, you can't come in to see your aging mother who has just had a fall, seems kind of unlike Claire. And it felt very written in the way that she only did that so that you could then have him barge in and walk to the other room and look around and like all this stuff. Sinister music, weird creepy lighting, him saying vaguely threatening things. This just doesn't seem like the same character from 2 episodes ago where he was basically nice and polite, even if he's on the opposite side to Jamie. And this is so clearly setting him up as now he is a baddie. Do you get this? He's a baddie now. And speaking of predictable turns, I mean, I feel like Pigswill has also completely shown her hand and is probably going to turn out to be a baddie in some way or other. Like, not liking Brianna and basically suggesting marriage and her kid becoming the next lord. She's just becoming a grabby gold digger. So run away, William. But again, I feel like we're getting Cliff's Notes versions of these stories, and the parts where it slows down are conversations that the relevance of isn't usually clear because it feels clunky and feels like it's set up for something, but I'm not sure what. And that's largely because that's how the show generally goes. And the problem is the payoff will probably be something that down the line you'll go, oh, that's why that was said in that episode. Not because it made sense in the episode, but because it was building towards something. And book readers are probably going to be like, oh, that's the setup for such and such. But people who haven't read the books will hear that scene and go, I don't know why I'm listening to this. It doesn't make any sense. And that's not much fun. And again, as somebody who has no intention of reading the books, that's not as much fun for me. Also, did Parsley forget how to act? Like, all kindness to the actress, but most of her lines here felt really clunky and stilted. I mean, maybe they only had her on set for a day or two or whatever. I know she's quite in demand and she's on quite a few other shows and movies these days. But yeah, it wasn't good. And I don't normally have to actually say much about the acting on this show, but yeah, just clunky. And in terms of storylines, I presume they're holding off telling us Buck's story until Brianna and Roger return from Savannah so that he can sit and tell everybody the story at the same time, which is very TV show. And I presume that they need him here because he's going to be kicking around on the ridge to do something next week. I mean, the next week on made it look like there may be some kind of showdown. I mean, otherwise, why not just have him come back when Roger and Brianna were already back to tell his story then? I mean, are we going to actually see any of this? Is he just going to turn around and go, oh yeah, anyway, so I magicked myself back to the future and killed Rob, or back here, and then he came through the stones a few minutes later, and I realised who it was, and I marked him deed and took the book, the end. I feel like it's going to be really unsatisfying. Maybe not, but I feel it is. And also, see all these smiles? Bollocks. Remember, this is still the guy who hanged Roger. Roger and Bree may have gotten past that, and, you can say, oh, we've forgiven this person, but seeing him up front face to face, it seems weird that everybody suddenly got past this. Like Jamie and Claire, I feel there'd be a little more inner conflict, just saying. Also, speaking of conflict, this is a show that, again, has no direct through line. I've said this many times, basically since season 5. It's a big thing that the characters should have something to solve or aim for during the series. But this is kind of a mini adventure, which a lot of the little things that pop up are kind of mundane, and they're not even episodic, because they usually run over a couple of episodes. So a bit like a soap opera. And sorry if this feels repetitive and boring, but this is the central problem of Outlander, the TV show, is that it inherently wants to focus on Jamie and Claire, specifically Claire, and they don't have a huge story. Claire has no narrative question needing answered. None at all. At this point, the closest thing is Jamie's King's Mountain death potential thing. And as I said, that isn't even interesting at this point, especially with Claire having the ability to do force healing and resurrection. But also, everyone who actually has something going on is a minor character, and those storylines get tied up in 2 seconds, like the one about William, like looking for his dead cousin and stuff. That was like a thing for an episode and a half, and now he's back home, and what's his story now? He's mooching about at home, and is he or isn't he going to shag Pigsty? I mean, is that really even a question? He might as well. What's he got to lose, other than his sanity? So where does that leave us? Well, it doesn't leave us in a bad place. I mean, this wasn't a bad episode. But again, it's still one that's just kind of chugging along in a state of mediocrity. It's interesting, actually, because I've been rewatching Season 1 of One Piece, the piratey anime adaptation thing on Netflix, because Season 2's come out. And it's way more interesting involving than Outlander. And that's a silly cartoonish show about a world of pirates with magic powers seeking out a hidden treasure. Now, I'm not saying it's the same type of show, and I'm not saying that I would judge them on the same categories, but that's a show where I feel like there's almost no fat on it. Almost every line of dialogue and scene has a purpose in the show, and it doesn't feel overly clunky. I mean, it's not Shakespeare, but it feels less clunky than this, and it feels like everything that's happening is happening for a reason. And next week is going to be the midpoint of this show. And I would hope that they're going to do something big with next week, so that you've got like something in the middle of the season to kind of, make everyone go, oh, something happened. And I wouldn't put it past them to maybe do a two-parter, so maybe episodes 5 and 6 are going to be 2 parts of a big thing, big ruckus with Cunningham at the Ridge, and Brianna and Roger at opposite ends of a battle, and you could do a big cliffhanger at the end of episode 5. That might be okay. I mean, they might not. They might just do it one episode of something. They might not at all. It might just drag on with nothing major happening. But we'll see. No spoilers in the comments, please. If I see somebody saying this is a spoiler, I just don't read the comments, sorry. But I just don't want to risk spoiling something for myself before we get to the end of the season. There's no point. I'd rather just see the rest of the show without getting anything ruined about what's coming up. I can always look it up after the show's finished. But yeah, do let me know though what you thought of this episode. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Are you still enjoying the show? Do you think I'm missing something fundamental about it that isn't dependent on me having read the books? What do you also think comes next? Do you think we're going to get another spin-off show? Do you think there's going to be a movie? There was some weird chat online about Meryl Davis saying that, maybe the show isn't over with. It sounded like bollocks to me, but, in some interview they said, we could potentially come back in a few years. We'll see what happens to tie in with the final book. But yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But I could be wrong. Is Outlander dead in the water when this season ends? Let me know your thoughts. But until next time, these have been my grumpy opinions.